Hi, welcome to Tales of Dread. Tonight we have some Skinwalker stories for you. Around 9 p.m. on a rainy night in May 2003, my friends and I were hanging out. We were from the Navajo tribe and were getting water for the animals in Sunrise, Arizona. We were having a great time. Tony was driving, I was in the passenger seat, John and Cody were in the back seat, and we were telling jokes and laughing. We went to the windmill, turned on the water, and waited for the barrel to fill up. We were walking around and looking at the cows in the area when the water started to overflow. John, who is a professional sheep herder, ran to get the hose. Then we got back in the truck as a group. When I got in the truck this time to drive, it wouldn't start. I tried and tried to start the truck, and I even looked under the hood to see if something was wrong, but I couldn't find anything. I got back in the truck. Tony, John, and Cody all wanted to go mess around with the cows. I tried to figure out what was wrong with the truck while they were outside. I jumped up when I heard a sound so loud that I thought the guys were just throwing rocks at the cows to scare them. So I kept working and looking for what was wrong. The sound happened again, so I got out of the truck and told the guys to stop. When they got back to the truck, they started to come back. I asked them if they had thrown rocks at the windmill, but they all said no. That's when I got the chills. Then we went back where the cows were, but this time Tony stayed with me. Then the sound came back. This time, though, it was tougher. Tony yelled at them to stop and they did. No one answered. Most of the time, they would tell him Zaya, which is a Navajo word for calm down. He called them again, but nobody answered. At this point, we started to worry. Worried a lot. We started to look for them by walking out into the dark. No one answered when we called out their names. We didn't have any lights. The clouds kept moving in and out of the moonlight, which was the only light we had. We couldn't see where we were going at all. We finally found them after about 10 minutes. They were lying on the ground with their eyes wide open and almost shaking. Tony. And I thought about what might go wrong. We have heard stories about these skinwalkers, or Yana Goluchi in Navajo. We've met people before, but not like this, or at least not out in the open like this. We knew what we had to do, but we didn't know how many there would be. Then we heard some rustling in the nearby bushes, which made Tony and me very scared. But when we heard it again, first to our right, then to our left, then in front of us, and finally behind us, we started to get scared. Everything happened in about 3 seconds. The chills went all the way up our backs, and I knew Tony always had some Navajo mountain tobacco or blessing cedar to protect us from these skinwalkers, but he didn't have either of them, so Tony and I ran back to the truck with Cody and John's half-dead bodies. Something was running after us, and we could hear its steps. We got back to the truck and got back in, and then there was no more noise. The skinwalkers used witchcraft on Cody and John, but when it wore off, some sick-looking coyotes jumped up on the hood of the truck. There were 3 things that looked like coyotes but had more human features. They could walk either on all 4 legs or just on their 2 back legs. Their eyes were clear and red, like blood. They smelled like dead animals, and the smell was so bad you couldn't stand it. We all jumped back in our seats and screamed like little girls. They began to chant or sing. We knew they were speaking Navajo, but we were so scared that we couldn't understand what they were saying. Then, just outside Tony's window, a tall, black, long-haired creature with crystal-like eyes was breathing heavily, and had the ugliest face we'd ever seen. Tony looked right at it and jumped back so fast and hard that he almost knocked Cody out. Something that looked like powder came through the window and hit us from the creature. We all started to calm down, and slow down our breathing. After a few seconds, it was quiet. We started to knock out one by one, and the next thing you know, it was done. The next morning, we woke up in Tony's bedroom, face down butt up. We never found out what happened to the skinwalkers, but we did a series of ceremonies to protect ourselves from the sickness the skinwalker gave us. The medicine man told us that the people who hurt us did so because they were jealous. They were envious of us because we had so many things and had done so many great things. So we turned their power against them so it would hurt them, and the witchcraft they gave us was supposed to get them back. After the ceremonies, Tony went back to his house, and his mom said that night, we walked in the door at 1:30 a.m. I went to my room after getting a glass of water. She also said how quiet we were. She thought that we were still sleeping today. We still hang out, but we also still get water and take care of the animals. However, we will never forget what happened that night when I was about 12 years old and driving with my father on a Navajo Nation road from Window Rock, Arizona, to the I-40 junction near Sanders, Arizona. All of the reservation is trees and high desert, and there aren't any houses or running water for miles. My dad and I were driving south at about 2 a.m. when it started to snow. About 40 minutes after leaving Window Rock, my dad and I saw a woman standing by the road without shoes or a coat. She was about 25 feet from the road when we saw her. She didn't even look back to see who it was or try to hitchhike when we saw her. She kept walking as though nothing was wrong. Then my dad says, "Damn, she must be cold." I started to laugh because I thought she might be drunk. I mean, she was walking in the middle of the night in the middle of nowhere. My dad stopped for her, but she kept walking, so he called out in both Navajo and English, "Hey, do you need a ride?" When my dad yelled, she slowly turned around to look at us, but her long hair covered her face so much that you couldn't even tell what she looked like. She had a mop head because her hair just covered her whole head. She walked toward us slowly, stepping on rocks, branches, and snow. She walked up to the passenger side of the truck where I was sitting and just stood by the window and looked at me for about 15 seconds. My father told me to open the door and get in the back. But as soon as I opened the door, she took off running into the dark forest. My dad and I were shocked because it was cold and there was no one around for miles. So I just shut the door, and my dad shut it after me. We just left and wondered what the hell was wrong with her. Since she looked like any other person, after a few weeks, my dad went to see some of his friends who lived within 5 miles of the area. He told them what had happened, and they were shocked. They asked if the woman's hair covered her whole head and if she had any shoes. And my dad was like, yeah. Then they told him that the woman wasn't real, she was a ghost. Both my dad and I didn't get it. We were like, what? She did look like a real person, though. Well, my dad's friends weren't surprised because Navajos are used to hearing weird stories like that and meeting strange people all over the reservation. I'm from Gallup, New Mexico, but I live in Oklahoma. Anthony and Alicia, my son and daughter, had just moved here from Gallup. They rented a house in the same town where I live. So my aunt and I drove back to Gallup to get their stuff out of storage. It was the start of March, and there was a lot of wind. We pulled the horse trailer behind the pickup. It was empty on the way there, and we can only drive 45 to 55 miles per hour without the trailer starting to swing all over the road. So a trip that usually takes 11 hours took only 7. Well, you guessed it. We were on I-40 west of Albuquerque, New Mexico, for about 17 hours. There are now more than one Indian reservation there. Anthony was driving late at night. He had to go to the bathroom badly, So he got off the highway at the bottom of 9 Mile Hill, west of Albuquerque. He went around the gas station because it was closed and a few big trucks were parked in front of it. I told him not to stop there because I saw someone by the trash can. When he pulled up a little farther, we looked back and saw that no one was there. I thought I was just tired and maybe seeing things. He started to get out of the truck, but I told him to hurry because something didn't feel right. When he got back in the truck, he agreed and said it felt like someone was standing behind him while he was peeing, and he was afraid to look back. So he ran as fast as he could and jumped into the truck. My son started driving west on I-40 again about 10 miles later. He began to slow down. There was a car in the middle of the road, quite a ways ahead of us. We could see the brake lights, and the car looked like it was in the middle of the road turned sideways. When I saw what my son was doing, I asked him what was going on. He said, "Hey, do you see that car?" When I looked again, it was driving perfectly down the road as if it had never stopped. I told my son to get off the road to the side. When I asked if he was tired, he said, yes. So we both got out of the truck to switch places. I walked around the front of the truck, and Anthony walked around the back and stepped over the tongue of the trailer. Just as I was getting in on the driver's side, a car went by, and I looked at it as it went by. At the end of the car, on the pavement, right by the tail lights, was a man. He was on all fours, with his hands and feet on the ground. A buckskin was wrapped around him. It almost looked like he had jumped off the back of that car as it went by us. He was gone the next second. I thought I must be hallucinating. Now that it was late, I was getting very tired. On the other side, my son got in, and I drove down the road. I didn't say anything about what I saw, but I did look in my rearview mirror to make sure the trailer wasn't moving. I didn't want things to get crazy. When I looked back, I saw something on the trailer flapping in the wind. It looked like the bottom of a jacket or maybe the bottom of the buckskin I saw draped over the man in the road. Then I asked Anthony if he had seen the man walking in the road behind the car. He said yes and told me what he had seen. It turned out that way. I had seen the same thing. Then he asked me if I'd seen a man leaning against the back of the trailer. I told him I hadn't, and he asked me again. Anthony said that when he was getting in on the passenger side, he had looked at the back of the trailer and seen a man leaning against it. He said that I hadn't looked in the mirror on that side. He said he couldn't see his face, but he could see blue light around it. He said it looked like the blue you see when you turn on your cell phone. I then told Anthony that there was something on the back of the trailer or maybe even on the tongue. Anthony eventually fell asleep at this point, but I kept looking in the rearview mirror instead of paying attention to the road. At one point, I almost missed a turn because I could see the shadow of 3 fingers in the rearview mirror. On that curve, there was a 100-yard drop-off, so it was good that I was driving slowly. We got to the gallop. Between 3 and 4 a.m. I woke up my son so he could go unlock the gate at his dad's house. When I opened the door, the cab light came on and flickered like someone was moving their hand back and forth under it. Anthony saw it too. When I lifted the seat to get our stuff out of the back, I saw that the seat was down in the extended part of the cab. When we left for our trip, the seat was up and can't be put down unless someone pulls a lever on both sides of the pickup. I yelled at Anthony to get back to the truck so he could see the seat. I thought I might be going crazy. We went into the house and went to sleep. The next day, we loaded up the trailer and drove back to Oklahoma. When it got dark, I looked in my rearview mirror and could see the side of the trailer perfectly from the brake light of the truck. The night before, I couldn't see a brake light reflection at all. So whatever was with us was on the back of the bumper, covering up the taillight. Anthony thought that a skinwalker had seen us stop on the side of the road because we were tired and was trying to make us crash. He thinks that the flickering light inside the truck and the down seat in the back are signs of his recently deceased grandmother. Anthony was very close to her, and he felt that she was keeping the skinwalker away from us. As a young adult, every summer, I would spend a few weeks at my grandmother's house on the Navajo reservation. I enjoyed spending time with her, eating the delicious fried bread she made, and listening to her stories. My grandmother would sometimes hire someone to do odd jobs around her house and land. Well, one night before the sun went down, my grandmother asked me to drive him home, which was about 4 miles away from where she lived in the valley. I was more than happy to say that I was only 14 years old when I was asked to drive a truck. Remember that nobody cares that you're only 14 and driving around hell on the res. Not many people are around to see you. Anyway, my 9-year-old brother got in the truck cab with me, and the worker and my dog rode on the tailgate. After I dropped the worker off at the shack that he and his brother called the house, we were off. As I said before, it was evening and the sky was a deep red as the sun set behind us. We were leaving a nice dust trail on the dirt road, and the radio was playing music from the only radio station that could be picked up from Holbrook, which was the closest town. Arizona. There was nothing weird or strange. At this time, I saw something move in the bushes a little farther up the road to the right of us. I remember slowing down because I thought it was one of the many free-roaming sheep in the area. When I drove by where I thought I saw it, the sheep would dart out in front of the truck. I sped up and didn't think about anything else. But then, out of nowhere, I got this dark, dreadful feeling. I didn't know why I felt this way, but I knew there was something wrong. When I think about this memory, I can only remember a few clear things about that night. I remember looking in my rearview mirror and seeing the dark silhouette of something very tall and skinny that seemed to be covered with some kind of hair or fur running behind the truck after us. Whatever it wasn't normal or human at all. I remember my brother crying and my dog barking furiously at whatever was chasing us. I also remember going very fast and shaking violently as the truck bounced up and down on the washboard dirt road. I remember that as my brother cried, this thing was getting closer and closer. On your side, it's coming up. I remember being scared as hell and thinking that I didn't want to die at that moment, which I thought would be our last. I remember going fast around a bend in the road and seeing a car coming at us from the other way. At that moment, I felt instant relief and thought that whatever had been following us was now gone, shaken up, but still alive. When we got to my grandmother's house, we had no idea what had just happened. We ran inside and didn't look back because we were afraid that whatever was after us had followed us home. As we told my grandmother what had happened, she listened. We were surprised that she didn't seem to surprise us. She kept telling us stories about black magic, which the Navajos call Belushi or skinwalkers. Needless to say, I didn't want to look out any of the windows for the rest of the night. And, without going into too much detail, I never drove on the reservation at night again until I was 21. I'll just say that these skinwalkers are bad men and ghosts who do bad things with the help of black magic. I'm telling you that they are real, even if it sounds crazy. I believe that God is real, and that He is a great being. I also believe that the devil is real and has ways to show himself. Some readers might not find this scary, which could be because I don't write much, but what really happened that night scared the living crap out of me. If you have any doubts or want a big scare, I invite you to visit this part of Arizona. I promise you won't be let down. My dad has a small delivery service that he runs out of our farm. We mostly take care of small packages out in the middle of nowhere that the bigger delivery companies don't want to deal with because it's too much trouble. My dad is the only person who works for us, and we have a trailer and a few pickup trucks. One day, we'll send a package to Window Rock. My dad gets the call for the job while he is hanging out with his Navajo friend Travis and his girlfriend on the Navajo reservation in Arizona, which is about 2 hours from where he farms. Travis says that he has family in Window Rock that he hasn't seen in a long time and invites them to go with him. I was around 6 or 7 years old at the time, and it was summer. So, Dad decides that we'll all go down together. He can do his delivery quickly, and while Travis sees his family, we can go check out the Window Rock, which is a big rock face with a big hole in it that goes to the other side. It's kind of neat. Since my dad's truck was full of freight, we had to drive in separate trucks. We decided to bring walkie-talkies so we could talk to each other. We spend our time in Window Rock, where most things don't go wrong. And my dad and I start driving home along the old highway, followed by Travis and his girlfriend in their truck. I don't remember much about our trip to Window Rock, but I will never forget the next part. We were somewhere on the highway between Window Rock and Gallup. The road was kind of slippery because it had rained earlier in the day. So, we were driving pretty slowly on the left side of the highway, where there were only sandstone cliffs, and on the right side, there was a huge field with a small barbed wire fence separating it from the road. When we got to the top of this hill, we saw what looked like a very large dog sitting on its haunches in the middle of the road, facing the cliffs. Over the radio, my dad says, "Hey, Travis, do you see that big gas dog?" Travis starts to yell back over the radio that it's not a dog, and that they should speed up and hit it. He keeps yelling, "Hit it. You have to hit it. Please hit that fucking thing right now." And it sounds like he's almost going crazy. So, my dad speeds up, and as we get closer, I can start to see it a little better. It looks like dried blood is all over the brown hair that is tangled and matted all over it. It's still facing the cliffs, but when our headlights hit it, it turns around and looks right at us. It has a face that looks like a cross between a bear's and a person's. It looks bent and warped, and almost like it's in pain. As we get closer to this thing, we start to realize that it's actually pretty big. Even though it was still sitting on its haunches, the hood of the truck puts it at about shoulder height. We're about to hit it when it lets out a scream that sounds like someone screaming when their lungs are filling with water. It then leaps backwards into the field and lands just on our side of the barbed wire fence. Then, with one more jump, it was gone. Travis's song comes back on the radio. "Keep going, holy ship." We have to leave this place. We need to move quicker. He kept saying that last part over and over. We need to get out of here as quickly as possible. Pretty soon. We are going very fast. And just as we were getting close to the edge of Gallup, we got pulled over. Travis also had to stop his truck, so we all did. This makes the Navajo police officer very nervous, so he immediately asked Travis why he had to stop as well. Travis says we just saw a skinwalker a few miles back, and it's been following us ever since. The officer goes white and stutters something about a verbal warning. He then gets in his car and drives away. We do the same thing, and that night we didn't see anything else. But when we got home, Travis wouldn't let us leave until we gave him a Navajo totem that was meant to scare it away. Anyone who has been to the Navajo reservation has probably heard or seen some scary things, like skinwalkers. I've only seen one of them. Here's what happened. I'm from a small town in northern Arizona that is between the Coyote Reservation and the largest Navajo reservation in the United States. Being so small, my high school. One is a high school that has an average of 80 students each year. Always had to go 5 to 10 hours south, one way, to play a sport at another high school. We travel a lot on the Navajo reservation because of this. When we went out to play, we usually stayed in hotels and came home in the morning. But this trip was different in a few ways. I remember the basketball coach saying that the school didn't have enough money to put the teams up in a hotel on that trip. So we would be on the road for about 12 hours in total. That season, I was the only senior boy who played basketball. We had just finished our big game and were on our way home on the bus. Big Blue. We left, and it wasn't long before we were in the res, about 2 hours of driving. At this point, it was about 2 a.m., and everyone was asleep. I noticed that the bus driver had sped up when we crossed the border and was now going about 85 miles per hour. He never went over the speed limit, so I thought this was a little strange. At least, I never did it in high school. I couldn't fall asleep like the rest of my team, so I just sat in the back of the bus and watched the full moon light up the barren desert landscape. When I looked out the window, I saw a person running toward the bus at an angle that looked like a chase. And keeping up with a bus going 85 miles per hour. As the figure got closer, I could see that it looked like a person. In fact, it looked just like a person, except that its face was painted half black and half white, and its eyes were glowing like a rabbit's eyes when a spotlight is shining on it. I thought, oh my God, it's a skinwalker, as soon as I saw it. The skinwalker ran up to the edge of the road and kept up with the bus, jumping over sage breasts and rocks while staring right at me. Once I made eye contact with the thing, I couldn't look away. It felt like my head and eyes were being held in place by something. The skinwalker only gave me a smile. This cruel smile that went from ear to ear and showed yellow, pointed teeth that were crooked. I thought I was going to throw up, and I was scared the whole time. The Skinwalker began to fall down on all fours, still able to catch up to the bus. I could see his bones breaking and putting themselves back together again. Hair started growing all over the Skinwalker's body, and in about 3 seconds, it turned into a coyote and ran off into the desert, out of sight. When it was gone, I ran to the bathroom on board and threw up a mixture of food and blood. I didn't tell anyone because I was afraid they'd think I was crazy. I told my Navajo friend everything. She told me I needed to get a blessing from the chief, who was also a friend of mine. The next day, I saw him in the school parking lot. He just walked up to me, said something in Navajo, and waved something that looked like a feathered scepter. To this day, he turned around, got in his truck, and drove away. Since then, I haven't seen another Skinwalker. This could be because I moved away from that town and the res, and if I have to go south, I take the long way around. All of this took place about 5 years ago. After a night of hanging out, a few of my friends and I decided that we'd go on an adventure at around 3 a.m. We rode about 15 miles to get to these old Spanish ruins in New Mexico, which used to be the place where the Inquisition took place. I can't remember what the place is called for the life of me. But anyway, we jumped the palace's front gate and started looking around. One of my friends brought a flute with him, and after about 30 seconds, he started playing it. When they were playing something, they started screaming very, very loudly on the tops of the long, broken down walls of the place. It moved quickly from wall to wall, screaming. The most terrifying scream you could ever think of. We had a lot of fun there, but then one of my friends peed his pants, so we left and drove a few hours to Bandelier National Monument, where we're going to camp for the rest of the weekend. We got to Bandelier around 6 or 7 in the morning. We set up our camp next. After talking about what the hell happened at the ruins for a few hours, I went behind it to pee, which was only about 300 feet from our camp. This is where things start to get a little less clear. I remember seeing 2 desk devils coming toward me, and when I turned around again, 2 of my friends were there and motioned for me to follow them. I had no choice but to go with them. I felt like I was being chained to them and dragged behind them. After what seemed like 10 or 15 minutes of following them, I woke up. They didn't look like my friends, because they had bright red hair and cat eyes. These 2 friends were both named Burnett. When I stopped walking, they gave me what was probably the scariest look I've ever seen. Monsters in movies and books have nothing on this. I turned around and ran as fast as I could back the way I came. After about 5 minutes of sprinting, I got back to that rock where I started and found our camp. Everyone was still sitting there and talking. They didn't even notice I wasn't there. I told them what had happened with the Skinwalkers who looked like them, and we packed up everything, left in about 10 minutes, and got back to Albuquerque as fast as we could. I was a kid when this happened. My uncle and I had just finished cutting and gathering firewood for my grandmother because it was getting dark. We were driving back on a dirt road at about 30 miles per hour, give or take 5 miles per hour. Before I could turn to look out my window, which was on the passenger side, I had this horrible feeling that I was being watched. My uncle yelled quickly, "Don't." When I heard a tap on my window, I completely stopped moving. My heart felt like it was beating out of my chest. My uncle sped up and started praying loudly in my native language. I didn't know what was going on and thought it was over until our truck suddenly dropped from the bed. My uncle then started telling me over and over, "Look at me and don't turn away." Then I heard it again, either from behind me or from the window. It was getting harder to breathe, and I wanted to cry. After a minute or two, the truck went down again. My uncle went inside and looked around. Aside from the truck and the road, it was quiet. He looked at me and said, "In the morning, we'll ask your dad to say a prayer. So the bad people will basically forget our faces." That's how to say what he said in Navajo in English. I remember sitting in the back seat and just staring at the radio while my uncle sang an old prayer until we reached my grandmother's house. I called my uncle because I was having bad dreams about what happened that night. We talked about it for a while, and he said, "I didn't see faces, I just saw eyes that looked like brake lights." It looked at you before ending the call. I tried to make him laugh about it. When it was in the back, why didn't you just step on the brake? Don't laugh. Just a pause because he knew it wasn't alone. As many of you may already know, my family and a lot of other Navajo people don't like to talk about skinwalkers because they think it will draw their attention. Well, I didn't grow up in the Navajo Nation, so I didn't know much about skinwalkers when I was young. I didn't believe it at all. My mom used to tell me a story about how, in the 1980s, when she lived with her siblings and my grandparents on the southern edge of Shiprock, she and my aunt saw a skinwalker right outside their driveway under a streetlight. She said it was a black dog with a dirty front leg that was twisted like a noodle and strange eyes that had a soft, burnt orange glow. Me, being my own clothes, questioned every word, but I never said that my doubts left me. But all of these doubts went away. Last October, when I went to visit my grandparents, my family and I had just finished going to the Navajo Nation Fair Carnival and called it a night. We could walk home in just 10 minutes because the house was so close. So, we did that when we got there. It was about 9 p.m., and we stayed up until 2 a.m. talking about family, and the news in the area. At that time, I just decided to open my mouth and blurt out the question, "Hey, guys, are skinwalkers real?" My grandmother said, "You shouldn't be talking about that." I asked her why she was talking about it. So, after my mom told her to go to bed, she and my grandfather both did. One of my aunts says, in a very careful way, that they're really fine. Had a few starts screaming outside of my trailer in Farmington a few nights ago, and your cousin had nightmares all night and woke up crying the next morning because she didn't want to make the pain worse. At this point, we all agreed to go to bed. Now, the trailer/home is pretty old, and the night was great. So we slept with the windows open, but with screens over them to keep bugs out. At this point, of course, everyone had gone to sleep except me. Well, because my mind was still going a million miles an hour about skinwalkers and I wondered if I would ever meet one when I was a kid on the reservation, I was told it's bad to think about skinwalkers because it can still get their attention. That's when everything really started to go wrong for me. Just as I was settling down and starting to feel ready to sleep, I heard something moving outside. I get up from the couch and start walking toward the kitchen window and the trailer. The lights are off in every room, so the only light that can be seen is the porch light out front. I was glad for this because I told myself that if there really was a skinwalker outside, I hoped it wouldn't see me. So I get up the courage to look outside quickly through the porch light. All I can see is the dusty ground, the cars my family drove, and some old metal trash cans on the side of the road. This went on for about 5 seconds. I couldn't see anything, so I was about to turn around and go back to bed, thinking it was probably just a stray cat or something. Have only done 2 things. I'm getting scared because I hear what sounds like a distorted scream coming from outside. It's not far away. I take another look outside, and there. It's the first time I've seen it. A figure that looked like a coyote was staring at me from behind the cars, just out of reach of the porch light. However, it didn't look right and made me feel bad just by seeing it. It was grey, and its hair was all messed up. Its eyes gave off a scary orange-red glow. I figured out what the hell was going on and ran back to my room. At this point, I also started to notice a terrible smell in the air that reminded me of rotting meat. I tried to wake my mother up, but she said, "Oh my God, it's almost 3 a.m. what would you like?" I started right away, but my voice was shaking. "There's something scary outside," I told her, and then she got mad at me for waking her up and said, "It's probably just a straight animal or something," which made me feel bad. The res animals always wonder about it at night. She didn't seem to understand what I was trying to say, so I screamed. Something Blair Witch Project related is going on outside my house. That did catch her attention. "What? About what are you talking?" Then we heard what she said. The scary sounding thing outside started making more screams and what sounded like thrashing noises on the ground here. That is exactly what I mean. So she and I both got up and looked out the window, where we saw the coyote-like thing walking toward the door. It limped and dragged its right back leg as if it were a handicap. We could hear it scratching at the door and making a strange, muffled moaning sound. My mom went and got my dad, and the 2 of them started shouting all kinds of Navajo words at the thing, telling it to leave and telling it wasn't welcome. Well, all this noise woke up the rest of the people in the trailer, and when they came out into the hallway, my mom just turned to them and said, "Skinwalker," while pointing to the door. Even though the noises were still going on. My grandfather got a gun and a bag of ashes out of a drawer, which showed that they already knew what to do. He put some powder on a few bullets, put them in the gun, and then ran straight to the door, shouting more Navajo words too fast for me to understand. He opened the door with his foot and fired twice. Nothing. The thing got away before my grandfather could even shoot it. "That is the fastest I've ever seen one go," said my grandpa. The next thing I knew, my aunts and parents were freaking out about what had just happened, saying things like, "What if it comes back tomorrow and it's sauce? Does that mean we're now being watched?" After that, my grandparents came over. Everyone, including me, sat down and said, "We'll be fine," and we all went to bed around 3 or so. When morning comes, my grandparents call a neighbor and tell them what happened. One of them was apparently a medicine man who used to take part in Navajo ceremonies to heal and cure illness. He came to bless the family and the land outside. This is my dad's story, told from his point of view. When I was 11 or 12, my family lived in a small mud and stone house that was a lot like ours. 2 of my brothers and I were now in the house. Everyone else went to Jimmy's vest, leaving us to take care of the sheep. We were getting ready for bed when we heard dogs barking like crazy outside. We thought it was just coyotes in the distance, so we didn't pay much attention. We asked them to stop talking. We were starting to fall asleep, but the dogs wouldn't stop barking. Somehow, I was able to get a few hours of sleep, but I woke up very late at night. The house was quiet and still enough for my brother to snore and breathe. I had to go to the outhouse, so I woke up my brother and asked him to take me there. He made fun of me for being scared, which I was. When we took our flashlight to the outhouse, the dogs started barking crazily in the sagebrush and running from place to place. My brother went first, and while he was gone, I waited outside for him. I used my flashlight to try to follow the dogs. One of the dogs let out a very loud bark, and then everything went quiet again. To be honest, it was too quiet for that time of year, not even the sheep was making noise. I heard a few of the dogs going crazy by the truck, and when I looked over, I saw this man with one arm on the cab roof of the truck. He was so tall I couldn't believe it. He looked at the dogs for a while, and when he suddenly kicked one of them, they all ran off in different directions. The thing looked up at me, and I could see its face. It was as white as a full moon, and it had bright red eyes and a black smile. I can neither move nor speak. It started walking slowly toward me until it was taller than me. As I looked deeper and deeper into its eyes, all I could see was a dark red, like the color of blood when you cut the throat of a sheep. I could barely make out the sound of my brother coming out of the outhouse. With this, the thing looked up at him and said, "Reality hit me like a ton of bricks." I saw that my brother was so busy with his buckle that he didn't even notice what was going on. I also saw that this thing's long hands were hovering just a few inches from my head. Its skin was black as ash, and it smelled like a dead animal that had been bloated. I still couldn't move or talk in the summer. The skinwalker started walking toward my brother. When my brother finally saw this figure, he stopped moving. As I got closer to it, it reached an arm out toward my brother's head, and something finally broke in me. I got so mad I couldn't stand it. I came out of the trance and lunged at the skinwalker, raising my arms like a wild animal and baring my teeth at it. I let out a growl I didn't know I could make. The thing that was trying to hurt us made me more and more angry. At first, it kept that smile, but the more angry I got, the more that smile went away. I finally gave it everything I had and started roaring at it like a wild animal. It fell backwards and ran into the night. When it turned around and looked at me, its eyes were dim and dull, and its smile had been gone since the next morning. After the feast, the family went home. After I told my parents the story, they hired a medicine man right away. When my mom drove us to her hometown on the Navajo reservation, I would sometimes ask her to tell me a story about a skinwalker. I remember every story she told me when we were driving through miles of nothing at night. Luckily, nothing bad ever happened to us on those drives. Anyway, my auntie told me one of those kinds of stories. Back in the day, my aunt and some of her friends used to go out to parties a lot. They would get in a beat-up van and drive to the middle of nowhere to drink and have fun. All of this happened on the Navajo reservation after dark, and that's what they were doing that night. Everything was fine and everything. When they hear what sounds like rocks being thrown at their van, everyone is quiet as they try to figure out what's going on. When the sound of rocks being thrown stops, something jumps up onto the roof of the van. My family had a white van that we took on road trips because it was big enough for all of my brothers and me. So, picture me as a child being told the story in a van. As soon as people figure out what's going on, They start to panic and rush to lock every door. My aunt jumps in the driver's seat and tries to start the engine, but the old van won't work. Whatever is still on the roof is still making banging noises and seems to be jumping up and down at this point. My aunt starts to freak out when she sees a hand with long nails reach over the roof and start scratching the windshield. At this point in the story, my mom would take one hand off the steering wheel and scratch the windshield to act it out. The thing on the roof then jumps off. People are still going crazy and yelling at my auntie to start the van. She keeps trying, and then she sees the Skinwalker walk up to the window on the driver's side and look at her from just a few inches away. So, my aunt jumped into the back of the car and started praying for her life. After a few minutes, the Skinwalker seems to leave. My aunt gets back in the driver's seat, starts the van, and they're off. We live in a small town on the Navajo reservation, which is a rural area. My grandparents had gone to a chapter house meeting for the evening, leaving my aunt and her two brothers at home alone. They were in the house, and they didn't have electricity, like many people on the reservation. About an hour after it got dark, my aunt and uncles were outside getting ready for bed. They heard sounds like things were being moved outside. When my oldest uncle looked out the front window, he saw a person standing near the truck. The nearest neighbor was miles away, so this was very strange. Whatever it was, though, opened the truck door and started looking through the things that my family had left in the car. My aunt and uncles were scared by what they saw and knew they had to do something. They got out the gun and all got their balance to hold it. They threw open the door and pointed the gun at the shadowy person. The figure turned and started walking toward them, not caring at all about the gun. The gun didn't go off when my uncle pulled the trigger. As the people got closer, my aunt could smell something that smelled like a dead body. It was so strong that she had to throw up. My uncle kept pulling the trigger, but nothing happened. In the distance, the figure got closer and closer, and headlights were coming up the road. My grandparents were lucky to be coming home. The figure looked at the lights, moved away, and hid behind a tree close to the house. My oldest uncle ran toward the truck with the gun. My grandfather got out of the car, and my uncle pointed to a tree. The thing had its head sticking out to watch what they were doing. My grandfather ran into the house and grabbed a handful of ashes from the stove. He then rubbed the gun with the ashes and put a bullet that was covered in ashes into the chamber. He went out onto the porch and shot at the tree. Whatever it was, he didn't think they would go off. When the gunshot rang out, the dark figure started to run. My grandmother chased my aunt into the house, and my uncles and grandfather followed. There weren't many roads or paths, so as my grandfather and uncles chased after this thing, the truck was bouncing around and the headlights weren't fixed on one spot. When the headlights hit the figure, my uncle says he saw a woman. Not only that, but whoever it was running on all fours like a bear. My grandfather eventually stopped the truck, and as they got close to the ditch that dropped about 20 feet, he got out and started to yell in Navajo. My uncle says that he was yelling about a local woman. He yelled that he wasn't scared, that he knew it was her, and that she should leave his family alone. After a few days, my grandfather told me that the woman he was yelling about had died. I've always heard that if you know who the Skinwalker is and say their name, it will kill them.